I really like Hazbin Hotel. It's this incredible story about resilience in the face of oppression, of standing up for the downtrodden and seeing the humanity in people, even if they do their best not to deserve it. It uses hell as a setting to tear down its conceptual roots, to reevaluate the narrow-minded view of morality that it represents. It challenges heaven both textually and metatextually, confronting the very concept of moral superiority. All of this while paying homage to its inspirations of post-Renaissance Disney, American cartoons, and musical theater with expressive animation, fun characters, and show-stopping musical numbers. But despite all this, it's not perfect. It has some problems in its storytelling, mostly in its world building and general structure. I think it's important we go over these problems and analyze them to get a full, honest view of Hazbin Hotel as a story, warts and all. So join me, won't you, as we take a trip into the uglier pits of the Inferno. Oh yeah, and spoilers ahead, obviously. Watch Hazbin, you heathens. So first off, in the intro, we encounter our first problem with Hazbin Hotel's world building. We are told that the angels are the residents of heaven and the creators of earth and humanity, implying that God doesn't exist, or at the very least plays a less prominent role in this interpretation of the Judeo-Christian mythos. Which is, if I might say, a very bold move. To the show's credit, it fills the aching hole in the mythology left by the absence of the guy pretty well with Angel Society as a unit. They now have the divine powers of creation, and they are now the ones who cast Lucifer into the dark pit he creates. Speaking of the fallen angel, this change allows the recharacterization of the Dark Lord to feel a lot more natural. It would have been a lot harder to imagine Lucifer as just a silly, goofy little guy had he tried to usurp the throne of God in a fit of jealous rage. Now, Lucifer was rejected from heaven because he had a chaotically creative mind that clashed with the order that the angels were trying to uphold. This passion for freedom of expression is what draws him to Lilith, who is no longer a disgusting condemnation of womanly independence, but the opposite. With Lilith at his side, Lucifer offers the fruit of knowledge to Eve, this time as an honest gift to imbue humanity with creativity, rather than an act of temptation away from the Word of God. Knowledge, of course, still gave humans the ability to knowingly do bad things, and that evil created sin and subsequently hell. The controversial power couple get thrown into the pit, Lulu gets depressed, and Lily starts girlbossing. Hell gets bigger and more powerful, which threatens heaven, who, in response, decide to ritualistically slaughter them every year to keep them from revolting against heaven's authority. Now, it's up to the daughter of Lucifer and Lilith to save demonkind from oppression. So, what's the problem here? This all seems like a pretty well-built world, one that properly handles the deviations from its inspiration. But, as confusing as it may seem, that is not good world building, that is good writing. By world building specifically, I mean how that well-written world is conveyed to an audience, how it's explained and presented to us. And everything I just described was conveyed to us by a controversial world-building technique: narrative exposition. To be clear, I don't think narrative exposition is inherently bad. I'm not CinemaSins. I think it can be done well with a unique execution. But despite the beautiful animation, I don't think that Hazbin Hotel's intro really earns it. It just doesn't intrigue me to learn more about the world by watching further. More important than the presentation, however, is the actual content of the scene. I believe that narrative expositions should only be explaining things the audience couldn't otherwise glean naturally from the story proper, and things that serve as important context for the events of the plot. With this in mind, none of the things we are told in this intro really fit those criteria. Lucifer's recharacterization is part of this show's incredible lineup of characters, and our time with him is able to tell us everything we need to know about him naturally. Lilith is barely relevant in this season, but everything we need to know about her is still established naturally through conversation and a brief appearance in a flashback, which, dare I say, makes her more mysterious and compelling. And finally, the angel-demon hierarchy is... it's the main conflict of the show. Of course, it's well established outside of this. One thing you could say is that the angels, being the creators in this version of the mythos, isn't super well established in the show, but still, I hardly think that alone merits this storybook intro. If anything, it seems like an element of the world that Hazbin is straight up holding back on exploring to a deeper level. We see in episode 6 that the angels don't even fully understand how a soul's moral alignment is judged, which says to me that there are still forces at play in this world that we have yet to understand. Maybe God does exist in this world after all? In any case, the main problem is that narrative exposition is a tired trope, and this instance doesn't invigorate it. I think maybe a part of the reason they chose this kind of intro is as an homage to the Disney princess movies that Hazbin Hotel clearly plays off of. But two things about that. First off, those movies are children's media from an era that felt the need to make all of their storytelling for children as obvious and straightforward as possible, sacrificing nuance for clarity. The storybook intro is a prime example of this philosophy, and without modification will cheapen the experience of a narrative. Side note, children are a lot more intelligent than we give them credit for. They, just as we, deserve stories that challenge and engage their minds. Secondly, the pilot episode of Hazbin Hotel already had a much better homage to the storybook intro. One that had all the artistry and magic, but instead of the overt descriptions of events, it had a beautiful musical number that establishes the pain and pressure that comes with Charlie's position. All the world building is there in the imagery, you just have to process it, and hey, even if you don't, the important elements are discussed in the meat of the episode. In the end, this intro just feels unnecessary. If anything though, this poor intro is a symptom of the structural problem that the series proper faces due to the bizarre relationship it has with the pilot. The first episode of Hazbin Hotel takes place 5 days after the events of the pilot, and the show has this half-and-half approach to whether or not the pilot should be considered part of the series proper. It's unusual for a show's pilot to be considered in this way. My best guess is that the team didn't want to waste the meager 8-episode season they were given retreading old ground, as it were. But even so, they couldn't risk alienating a portion of the audience that never saw the pilot and didn't intend to. Unfortunately, the effect of this half-and-half approach is that the first episode as an experience is awkward for either case. If you've seen the pilot, it becomes apparent whenever the show is re-establishing something or someone you already know, and if you haven't, well, there's no easy way to say this, the new introductions just aren't as strong as they could be. I believe this is because every character, relationship, and mechanic was designed to be introduced in the pilot. Of course, I think about the disparity between the storybook intros, but there's also the weakened character intros. Charlie's emotional stake in the conflict isn't felt as clearly, since it isn't immediately sung out to us. Alistair is no longer positioned as this sketchy outsider that Charlie is forced to employ out of sheer desperation, now feeling more like a disgruntled employee who struts around flexing his powers and causing problems on purpose. And Angel Dust feels so much more passive in his disrespect for the hotel. He just kind of sits around quipping and making everyone uncomfortable instead of actively undermining and publicly humiliating Charlie and her dreams. Don't get me wrong, the pilot is not perfect. It just feels like this is the point at which the story was supposed to begin. It does a much better job of getting everything in position, even if the moment-to-moment writing is worse. In fact, there's a clip from the pilot that I want to show you that illustrates this point as well as acting as a transition to my next.
Pisses you off more. Is there seriously no liquor in here?
I'm gonna kill him.
Too late, Toots. Wait! Would that make me double dead? Where exactly do I go? To double hell? Sorry, you're stuck with me, bitch. Get used to it.
So, apart from being generally unfunny and breaking the pace of the conversation, this line from Angel Dust brings up an incredibly important question. Can sinners die? In most interpretations of hell, the answer is no, because that would kind of take the whole eternal part out of eternal torment. The mere need for a question like this implies that Hazbin Hotel follows this trend. But this throws a pretty massive wrench into the whole concept of the extermination. How can the angels manage the population of an immortal people? It's a pretty important thing to establish in order to maintain the coherence of the main conflict, which is why it pains me to say that this is the most overt and arguably only reference to the immortality of sinners in the entire series. So let me rephrase this. An integral mechanic of this world that brings into question the validity of the entire main conflict is only explored in the text through a gag that doesn't even appear in what would be considered the main series. To make it worse, the gag itself is just bad. It's just a random thought that pops into Angel's head that is only tangentially related to the conversation he's having, and it isn't even answered. This is, frankly, insulting levels of world building. I feel like Angel is mocking me for taking the question seriously. A question that to him only exists as a medium through which to annoy someone. And I'll give him this, I am feeling very annoyed right now. The silver lining to this is that there is an actual answer to this question. Angelic weapons.
The angel weaponry is how people in hell hurt each other, because, like, technically in hell, nobody can really kill each other. You know, people are violent all the time, and it kind of defeats the purpose if they can just kill each other all the time. So the only way to really kill someone in hell or cause actual, like, bodily harm is to use angel weaponry.
So there you have it. Sinners are immortal until proven otherwise. The obvious problem being that this is the latest instance of an official source for this information, and it's a clip from a stream that predates even the pilot episode. The immortality-denying properties of angelic steel are explored in the series through its ability to harm angels, and I suppose you could argue that it's easy enough to intuit that if angelic steel can kill one kind of immortal being, then it can probably kill the other. But again, the immortality of sinners is very poorly established. If anything, the existence of the extermination as the main conflict thematically portrays sinners as painfully mortal. It's fine to leave some mechanics vague so that smart viewers can piece together the inner workings of your world through context. That's engaging storytelling. But it's not a good idea to apply that logic to elements directly related to the main plot. As an example of this being done well, take this clip from episode 7.
Stupid girl, are you really so dense you don't realize you're holding the answer?
Angelic weapons? It's that simple? How has no one else figured this out?
Angelic steel isn't common, and those who have it aren't exactly rushing off to test it against exorcists.
Up to this point, the only characters we know to have access to angelic weapons are these two here, Vaggie and Carmilla Carmine. Vaggie because she used to be an exorcist, but Carmilla because she is one of Hell's most powerful overlords. The only demon we see using angelic weapons is one of Hell's elite, meaning it's easy to conclude that angelic steel is reserved for the upper echelon of Hell's power structure. In episode 3, we see that Velvet, a spunky up-and-comer, is the only overlord among this meeting that actually feels the need to fight back against the angels. Not out of a desire to protect her home or even herself, the overlords have never had a problem with evading the exorcists, but seemingly out of an insecure, narcissistic desire to prove herself superior. All the older overlords are comfortable letting the extermination continue because they're already the most powerful protected members of Hell society, so there's no need for them to risk their position in a fight they have no reason to chase. In this way, angelic weapons become a symbol of the privilege of Hell's upper class. Not only does it give them the means to further oppress those beneath them, but can also potentially protect them from the one thing that still threatens their position. It essentially gives them immunity to consequence so long as they keep their heads low enough. This is a really well-built class structure that is enforced by the other mechanics of the world. If you dig far enough, you can see just how well constructed this world is. It's just that the actual text struggles to communicate that world through world building. The privileged position of Hell's elite is not integral to the plot just yet, so it's allowed to exist quietly on the sidelines, presumably waiting for its turn in the spotlight. But the oppression of Hell by angel kind is the main focus of Season 1, meaning now is the time to explore that corner of the world to the fullest. If angelic weapons are a symbol of the oppression of Hell's lower class, this can be extended to their use by angels, but without the mechanics of the world being properly established, this symbolism is lost through the removal of its context. We need to know that sinners are immortal to understand just how much power those with angelic weapons have over them. And those are all the problems I have with Season 1 of Hazbin Hotel. It has a weak intro, structural issues caused by a confused relationship to its pilot, and a neutered sense of stakes through the improper establishment of a key mechanic in its world. So, that's all. unless there is some sort of side series that exacerbates the issues I have with the clarity of the series' lore. Thank God that isn't the case. Helluva Boss is a side series set in the same world as Hazbin Hotel that feels a lot more down to earth. I see it partially as a fun way for Spindlehorse to explore the world that VivziePop has created while waiting for all the bureaucracy that comes with creating a corporately published animated series. Basically, it was an outlet for the team to flex their muscles and show the potential of Hazbin Hotel. Helluva Boss has a more distinct focus on comedy and action, with a less serialized episode structure. The serialization it does have pretty exclusively focuses on the relationships of its cast members. Rather than exploring the philosophical angle of Hell, it expands on this version of Hell as it exists as a tangible place, exploring locations, people, politics, etc. One would hope that this would help flesh out the world, maybe fill a few gaps left by Hazbin, but unfortunately, it's a lot more complicated than that. Helluva Boss is much less concerned with sinners. Instead, it stars a cast that consists entirely of Hellborn demons. Yeah, bet you didn't really consider that to be a very important distinction, did you? The concept of a soul born in hell is explored in Hazbin Hotel through our main character, Charlie Morningstar. The concept is brought up by Lute, who uses it to expand on the politics of the extermination and belittle Charlie.
The only reason you're still here is because Daddy gave you and your Hellborn kind a pardon from an exorcist blade. How does that feel? To know how little you matter.
Hazbin Hotel portrays the Hellborn as less important than sinners through their immunity to the consequences of the extermination, to the main conflict itself. Charlie's status as a Hellborn demon does double duty in further distancing her from the people she wants to protect, and further amplifying how selfless and caring she is as a leader. Being Hellborn in Hazbin Hotel means you aren't obligated to care about the main conflict, but Charlie does anyway because she's empathetic to the plight of sinners, a quality that is unique to her. In Helluva Boss, on the other hand, sinners are the ones who feel otherized. They exist primarily as clients to our main character's assassination business. In fact, Helluva Boss does the important work of establishing the Hellborn as the majority of Hell's populace, and that sort of makes sense when you consider that demons, sinners included, are still capable of sexual reproduction. It could be that the Hellborn are the products of the first sinners sent to Hell, or that they spawned naturally out of concentrated evil, or whatever, I don't know, and it doesn't really matter. The point is, Hellborn demons are distinctly different from sinners. The main difference is that they are not immortal. This is also the main problem I have with them as a concept. As far as I can tell, there are no signifiers to easily distinguish whether a character in the Hazbin Helluva universe is Hellborn or a sinner. We have to either see demon parents, severe wounds, or a previous human form on Earth as signifiers. The effect of this is that you have this poorly established categorization between demons that further complicates the already poorly established immortality of one of those kinds of demons. In other words, it becomes that much harder to intuit that sinners are immortal when they are being killed by angels and also killing other demons. This scene of Husk and Angel Dust killing all these sharks had me convinced for a long time that sinners have the kind of immortality that prevents them from dying from mortal wounds, but not from receiving them. But then I remembered that these shark people are the resident demons of the Greed Ring, vaguely established in Helluva Boss, who are all Hellborn. That's what tipped me off. The vague recollection of a series of details from a single episode of a side series. That was the only thing that could save me from fundamentally misunderstanding the mechanics of this world. Now imagine what it would be like to watch this show without brainworms. But who's to say that the sharks from Greed aren't sinners? Well, according to this tweet from the official Helluva Boss Twitter account, only Hellborn demons are able to traverse across the 7 rings of Hell. All sinners are confined to the upper ring, Pride, meaning that any demons that we see outside of Pride must be Hellborn. I don't get this. The whole point of the concept of Hell's rings, as coined by Dante's Inferno, is to send sinners to the ring that punishes them based on the sins they committed while they were alive. The wrathful go to wrath, the lustful go to lust, the greedy go to greed, and so on and so forth. Hazbin Hotel, for some unclear reason, keeps the naming scheme of the rings, but denies them the purpose for which they were named. to categorize, sort, and appropriately punish sinners. From a metatextual stance, it feels a little strange to have any portion of hell not dedicated to the thing it's supposed to exist for, let alone the vast majority of its space. But that's a bit limiting. Hazbin Hotel's version of hell doesn't exist solely to punish sinners. It serves more to house all the evil of creation, which now includes demons who were born in hell and were never human. The naming scheme of the rings now feels more like an artifact of this world's inspirations, but that's kinda my point. The naming scheme of the rings implies an adherence to the source material that confuses the true nature and mechanics of this world. I've seen theories and speculation that sinners used to be present all throughout hell, but at some point they were restricted for some reason. I feel like these kinds of theories have legs, only time will tell, really, but the point I'm trying to make here is that I'm not the only one who feels that this setup is a bit unnatural. But again, this is an aspect of the world that will probably be explored in a future season of either show. It has no meaningful bearing on the plot of the current seasons. With that, I'd like to move back to Hazbin Hotel, and particularly to the subject of the immortality of sinners. We now have an accurate picture of what it takes to understand this particular element of Hazbin Hotel's world, so let's lay it all out. In order to properly understand this very basic, fundamental mechanic that is integral to the plot of this single season of television, you need, in addition to the series proper, the pilot episode of the series, a few sparse details from the side series, a clip from a live stream, and a tweet from the side series' branded Twitter account. I wanted to lay it all out like this to illustrate what I believe to be the storytelling philosophy that causes Hazbin Hotel's writing to end up like this. That is, an overdependence on audience investment. Hazbin Hotel's story and world are well written. Everything is the way it is for a reason. But these reasons are often very subtle, if not entirely omitted from the main series, forcing an audience to invest themselves further in the canon in order to get a full view of the world. Hazbin Hotel's writing feels like it expects its audience to immediately dig into wikis and analyses and theories to supplement the world building that it failed to do on its own. I believe this to be an unreasonable request and an incredibly risky gamble. And I believe it is this gamble that has polarized the audience of Hazbin Hotel. If the gamble paid off, you did continue to invest yourself in the series. You watched through Helluva Boss, you read through the wiki, you engaged with the community. But if it didn't, you were left with a story that felt incomplete. Both sides then have incredibly different views on what Hazbin Hotel actually is. For the invested, it's a deeply compelling world that spans across many mediums and has connected you with people you might consider friends and peers. For the uninvested, it's 8 episodes of subpar storytelling. The complex nature by which this divide has occurred has caused significant friction between the two groups. The uninvested see the invested as unreasonable, off-putting, obsessed, annoying. The invested see the uninvested as the same. Neither are able to properly articulate their opinions in a way that is convincing to the other because they don't even realize they're hardly talking about the same thing. So, what's the truth? Is Hazbin Hotel good? Well, I'm sorry to disappoint the uninvested, but the answer is yes. As one of the invested, here is why I, and potentially we, continue to insist as such. It has nothing to do with rich lore, or a compelling plot, or a beautifully realized world. Hazbin Hotel, unfortunately, has none of those just yet. It's a daughter reconnecting with her estranged father. It's a relationship threatening to collapse under the weight of a lie. It's someone learning to accept themselves and stand up for the people they care about. It's 2 former enemies bonding over the desire to protect their loved ones. It's someone stepping into the role they want to fulfill for their people, realizing their potential as a leader. It's about 2 people realizing their love for one another transcends politics and language and expectation and everything. It's about standing up to oppression even if it puts you in danger. It's about fighting for what you believe in. It's about hate and love and loss and triumph and defeat and trust and struggling to the bitter end. And to some of us, that transcends a lackluster story or a poorly communicated world. First and foremost, Hazbin Hotel is a piece of art. It's an attempt to shave off a fragment of the eternal and deliver it to us. To complain about the inelegance of the delivery, to focus on its imperfections, is to deny yourself the beauty that the art is trying to convey to you. Should we not expect excellent deliveries? Of course we should. Transcendent art is a message, and if the language used to convey the message is flawed, then the meaning, the art, is lost. But when I watch Hazbin Hotel, I get the message. It succeeds in doing its work as a deliverer of transcendence. Mission accomplished, everything else is secondary. Whenever I rewatch it, I'm not looking to marvel at its design. I'm here to let it deliver that message. I'm here to listen. The script was really hard to write because every time I went back to the show to double check something, I kept being reminded that I was deliberately ignoring the elements of the show that I really appreciated. It was hard to tie my critiques together because they were so specific and hardly had any connective tissue. I was constantly being reminded of how I was nitpicking, misrepresenting the show, and shifting the focus away from Hazbin Hotel's excellence. It's hard to be critical of something you really like because the things you like about it will always remind you that they exist and how much they mean to you. But I'm done pretending like I actually care that much about Hazbin Hotel's problems. This show is incredible and means so much to me. I think it's beautiful, and I will never stop thinking that. But if you don't agree, please tell me about it in the comments. But for the love of God, please stop using your opinion on a TV show to fuel your superiority complex. Being a contrarian doesn't make you better. Hating fandom culture doesn't make you better. Being objective does not make you immune to bias. You are a flawed human being, and that means you have a limited view of the truth, just like the rest of us. So instead of arguing and fighting over who is right, instead of assuming that you are the only one who sees things as they really are, join the discussion. Listen to what people have to say. Because truth is not a destination, it's a journey. And we're all in this together. Trust me, hell is a lot more manageable with friends.